Hi, it's Larold, and today I want to talk about some upcoming class tuning changes that are going to be landing on July 25th. So that'll be the upcoming weekly maintenance Tuesday in the West and Wednesday in the Eastern Hemisphere. But before I do, I kind of want to start with a question here, really a pair of questions, and also a flashbang. There we go. So the first question is, if all the specs did the same amount of damage, would that be balanced? Would the game be balanced? And I think the answer is obviously no. But would it be better? I don't know. The second question is kind of based off the first. How big should the delta between the best and worst specs be? Should it be that the best specs in the game do 50% more damage than the worst? 25? 1%? I think the answer probably, for me, is somewhere between 5 and 10% between the best specs and the worst specs when they're played, relatively equally well. And with that, I want to kind of transition into looking at 3 sets of logs here with respect to tank damage, because that is the main thing that's being focused on in this class tuning this coming week. There's a lot of tank damage changes, mainly to underperformers. The difference here, as we can see, between the best and worst tanks on Rashok. This is Rashok 95th percentile, Mythic, of course. I'm using 95th percentile for all 3 of these fights, and Rashok's the first, Magmarax is the second, and Echo of Neltharion's the third. So we have a challenging single target fight in Rashok that does require you to use defensive skills and play somewhat defensively throughout the fight, even though, obviously this is 95th percentile log, so everybody in this cohort of players is going to be playing pretty offensively, pretty aggressively. But it is a bit different from Magmarax, where there's really not much damage happening at all. You're basically able to convert as much of your defense as you possibly can into damage. In Rashok, you do actually still have to play defensively at a couple of points throughout the fight. So we can see that Druids are, on average, like 8k DPS ahead of Monks, the second best tank, who are then a couple thousand DPS ahead of Vengeance Demon Hunters, who are a few thousand DPS ahead of Prot Warriors and Prot Pallies, with Blood DKs falling quite a bit behind. So this puts Bear Druids about 20,000 DPS ahead of Blood DKs. It's not great. If we just do the very quick napkin math, 92 divided by 71, about a 30% difference in damage. That's not great, man. But it gets worse when you get to a fight like Magmarax, where you're able to convert rage, those resources that could be spent on defense, into damage. It's very, very clear how much better Bear Druid is than every other class in the game at converting their defense directly into damage. I mean, just look at this chart right here. For the other 5 tanks, pretty much stays about the same. And then Bear Druid is just shooting off to the stars. Again, we compare that difference, 106 divided by 74. Very much napkin math, not to be like a definitive this is how they should be designed, but clearly we can see Bear is just accelerating. Goes from being about 30% ahead to closer to 45% ahead of Blood DK. And then finally we have Echo of Neltharion, a pretty bone-crunching fight that is mostly a single-target fight until the very end, where there's some AoE damage potential. That fight can really turn into an ad fest at the end, and we see Bear Druid come crashing back down. They gotta spend a lot more resources on defense throughout the fight to live through tanking Nelth, but also Vengeance Demon Hunter and Brewmaster Monk actually are able to gain a lot of ground when it comes to AoEing those ads. We can look down here at the max parses, which definitely can be exploitative. You can have people getting PIs or simped by evokers, or just using trinkets and cooldowns and all to kind of pad on ads. So it's not representative of definitive proof here either. But Monk and DH actually jump ahead of Druid in the absolute peak of parsing. But on average, they're still behind. But very close. And there's kind of a perfect little separation of 2 groups here in these more normal, traditional tanking scenarios. Druid's definitely at the top, but Demon Hunter and Monk are pretty competitive behind that. Prot Warrior and Prot Pally are kind of the B tier second class citizens, and then Blood DK is like just digging in the dirt, doing no damage. All right, I will refrain from flashbanging again, but you know, is that actually a problem? I don't know. I mean, if we look at this fight, Nelf, it's one of the harder fights in the raid. It's very near the end. Blood DK is still very popular because it is so tanky. Pally is still very popular, both because it's tanky and because it has spell warding, which is really useful. And Monk is popular because it's stuck for a 10,000 year sentence in maximum security debuff prison. But I think this delta between Blood DK and Bear Druid is way too large. You know, we're talking about, even in an ideal case, 25% more damage. That's a lot. That's a pretty huge difference. And so here's what we have for changes. Blood is getting all their ability damage increased by 10%. Now that is only ability damage, so it doesn't count procs from, let's say, trinkets, doesn't count procs from Shadow Flame armor patches or the crafted belt if you're using the Frostfire belt, doesn't count direct damage from potions if you're using the potions of shocking exposure, whatever it's called, shocking disclosure. Obviously doesn't count trinket on uses, doesn't count melee hits, because those are not abilities, they're just white damage. So all that adds up, depending on the class in the fight, to somewhere between 30 to 40% of your damage on average for a tank. So this winds up only being more like a 6% damage increase. And as we've seen, that's not even going to be enough to bring Blood DK up to the level of where Pally and Prot Warrior are now. It's going to go from being like, let's say 71,000 damage times 0.06. Okay, so that's like a 4k DPS increase. So now they'll be doing 75k, while Prot Pally and Prot Warrior is still already doing like 77k against Rashok. So they're still going to be very much bringing up the rear. Bear Druid, with all of their insane damage output, all of their incredible tankiness in raid, is getting the following nerf. Ursoc's Fury Absorb Shield reduced to 50% of damage dealt by Thrash and Maul was 60%. That's it. This is like your second most powerful heal, arguably, in Mythic Plus. You don't really run this in raid, so this is a non-change in raid at all, and a pretty minor nerf in Mythic Plus. This seems like Bear Druids are getting away scot-free, and I mean, they are for this week. But if you remember back to Season 1 with Prot Warriors, when they were in the same position that Bears are right now, completely dominant, this is how it started for Prot Warriors. And look at them now. They're down in the dirt. They're really having a rough time of it. I think they're the least popular tank in the game in all situations. I know they are in raids. As you can see, the number of parses here, just to look at the Neltharion list, like, parses for Prot Warrior, 42. Parses for Blood DK, 343. Parses for Pally, 657. You know, there's 15 times more parses for Pally than there are for Warrior. Yeah. I don't necessarily, I'm not predicting that they're going to nerf Druid, but I would expect it. I would expect to see some damage pulled back for Bear Druid at this point. Because right now what they've done is they've buffed Blood DK up to still be in last place by a pretty wide margin, left Bear Druid untouched, nerfed Brewmaster's AoE damage by nerfing Spinning Crane Kick by 20% and Keg Smash by 5. This does less than a 1% nerf in raid and single target damage. I have an image here, if I can pull it up. Here we are. Boom, here we go. This is the fine, not fine breakdown of Neltharion. This is my weekly Neltharion kill log. Blackout Kick, Tiger Palm, and Shoal, blah, blah, blah. All of this, acceptable. And then Keg Smash, 4.5% of damage. Spinning Crane Kick, less than 1.5% of damage. So this all winds up being, you know, right now you're doing however much, 100% damage. It'll be 99.1 after this change. It's fine for raid. It will actually be sort of a meaningful DPS loss in Mythic Plus, and given how incredibly untanky Brewmaster is in Mythic Plus, nerfing their damage output there doesn't really make sense. You know, it's the one draw that Brewmaster Monk has in Mythic Plus, is that it does pretty good damage in AoE. to cut that by this much and not do anything to change their insanely weak defenses in Mythic Plus is kind of shocking. You know, doing Brewmaster Monk on like tyrannical weeks doing 20s, it feels honestly less tanky than playing a Demon Hunter during fortified weeks. It's yeesh. And then finally, here we have Prot Pally ability damage being increased by 8% and Prot Warrior ability damage increased by 7%. So this is like a 6 or 7% damage increase for Prot Pally and a 5 to 6% damage increase for Prot Warrior. Probably about 5% and 6%. Respectively, which, you know, that won't bring them up to the level of Vengeance Demon Hunter, but it should bring them about halfway up. So do I think that this is going to change anything in terms of class balance? Of course not. I'm surprised that they haven't nerfed Bear Druid damage already, given how much of an incredible outlier overperformer it is, particularly in the ability to convert defense into damage. That is really, it's nice. It's one of the things I like most about Bear Druid, how strong they've made Maul and how good it is at converting defense into damage. It really does feel rewarding in those situations where you're able to make that choice. It's something I wish the other 5 tanks had more of, but since they don't, it is something I would expect to see reined back in, because the difference is insane right now. And just kind of as a last little bonus here, I don't really talk about non-tanks all that much, but I have been dabbling in Augmentation Evoker a little bit lately, and it's pretty fun, and I just kind of want to highlight some of the changes they've made here and say, I think it's not too bad. I like the direction they're going here anyways. So Closest Clutch Mates is a buff that basically just makes the main buffs for Augmentation Evoker stronger when you're not in a raid. Ebon Might, that's the main Augmentation Evoker buff. 30-second cooldown, 10-second base duration. Your mastery increases all of your buff durations. Makes it so that you buff your own damage by 10%, your 4 nearest allies' primary stat by 10% of your own. And so this is being changed to, instead of being 40% stronger when you're in a Mythic Plus dungeon, or I guess PvP, I don't know, it's going to be 20% stronger. However, it will increase your own damage by 20% instead of 10. That's definitely a damage nerf overall when you're factoring in, your own damage output and other players' damage contribution. But the reality is that right now, in Mythic Plus, Evoker is probably the single strongest spec in the entire game, even more than like Bear Druid, because it adds so much damage. I mean, it literally adds more damage than a direct damage dealer, while also adding tons of tankiness and group utility. I enjoy playing with them, but that's definitely a design problem. It makes the spec completely mandatory, and that's not a great spot to be in. Now, if they made more enhancement specs like this, such as, Enhancement Shaman maybe, I think that this would be okay. You could have a situation where the default group setup in Mythic Plus is like a tank, a healer, a support, and 2 DPS. I would maybe like that type of paradigm, but they would need at least like 3 different support specs, bare minimum, and that requires a lot more design and tuning than I think they would be able to unleash in the middle of an expansion. So that's definitely like an 11.0 concern at the very soonest. They have made some other changes. Obviously, I mentioned that Ebon Might now buffs yourself more. Eruption, your main damage dealing skill, was buffed by 40%, so that helps with that as well. Fate's Mirror is this talent all the way down here on the bottom right. It makes Prescience your 3% crit buff that you're able to juggle onto 2 targets. It makes it have all of the abilities that people who are buffed by Prescience cast have a 20% chance to do, a chance to do an extra 20% more damage or healing. Now it's down to 15%. That's probably fine. This is a capstone talent, so it's supposed to be very strong, but it is like a defining talent of the class. It's taken in all situations to the detriment of taking like even other options around here, so it kind of makes sense that this was reduced. It's also just a pretty big damage increase. And finally, maybe my single favorite aspect of Augmentation Evoker, Aspect's Favor amplifies Black Attunement to 7 to 10% maximum health. So just to point this one out, Draconic Attunements is just a passive. It gives you and your 4 nearest allies 4% more max health and 10% move speed. And then Aspect's Favor, this 2-point talent beneath it, is an absolute must-have because it makes using Hover give move speed to you and those 4 allies, like a pretty substantial amount, and it makes using Obsidian Scales, which is your sort of main defensive cooldown, 90-second cooldown, 30% damage reduction for 12 seconds, and then you can have 2 charges of it very, very cheaply. It makes it so that instead of being a 4% health increase, it's a 16% health increase, and it lasts for 12 seconds, you know, lines right up with the Obsidian Scales, and that basically is this right here, Rallying Cry with Inspiring Presence, except it's on a 90-second cooldown instead of a full 3 minutes. Now, it only hits 4 players other than yourself, so, you know, it's definitely not as strong in Raid, but for Mythic Plus, it's basically the same as Rallying Cry, except 1, it's not on the global cooldown, 2, you have 2 charges of it, and 3, half the cooldown. So, that definitely needed to be nerfed. And I still think a 10% health increase on a 90-second cooldown with 2 charges is very, very strong. So even though this nerf is a common whatever, maybe reduce the value of Augmentation Evoker in Mythic Plus, I mean, definitely reduce the value of Augmentation Evoker in Mythic Plus, I don't think it's going to be that bad. I still think they're going to be a very highly favorable class in Mythic Plus, very highly favorable class to bring to raids, but maybe not absolutely mandatory at any sort of high level of pushing at all. But, you know, honestly, maybe still so. They do bring a lot of utility. It's pretty nice to have them around, even if they did only add 80% or 90% of the damage of a real DPS. The amount of mana they give to the healer, the amount of defense they give to the tank and group members, the amount of CC they add is quite substantial. It really is an amazing, amazing spec, and I would love to see this particular role fleshed out into more specs across the game. I understand people not wanting to lose their spec identity. I mentioned Enhancement Shaman, and I know actual Enhancement Shaman mains would be pissed. But it would be pretty cool to see a lot more specs fill this role, and Shaman definitely seems to me like the main front runner for being kind of next man up to fill that support role. But yeah, I don't know. You know what? Let me know in the comments section. Maybe I'm forgetting another class that would be really good in a support role. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.